U of T comes under fire for their silence on suicide. Solitary confinement begins to get questioned, and Brexit reaches its climax. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Happy Wednesday, or Thursday, or really whatever day you're listening, but I wish I had some happy news to go along with that happy greeting. Unfortunately, I don't. We're starting off with some rather grim stuff today. Jumping right into it, U of T has come under a lot of fire for their supposed silence on suicide. The entire campaign was triggered on March 17th when a University of Toronto student killed himself in their, I believe it was the Bahan Center of Information and Technology. Obviously extremely tragic news, and this was actually only a month after a previous university student killed herself at Concordia University. The student died by suicide in their visual arts building. Obviously, this was very troubling because it seemed like a pattern was being established where more and more frequently, at regular intervals, university students were attempting suicide, and unfortunately, in these two cases, they were successful in committing them. The problem with U of T begins the next morning. They issued a series of cryptic tweets regarding the closure of the building, but they refused to acknowledge the word suicide. They used certain terminology such as due to unforeseen circumstances, basically euphemisms trying to play down exactly what happened here. And honestly, it was an extremely foolish tactic. A lot of people were outraged by it. It seems like U of T didn't realize we live in the age of social media. News travels extremely fast. People who first of all stumbled upon the body were talking about it. People who were at the scene of the investigation talked about it. And when you see these ambulances and police officers at the university, it becomes pretty obvious that something happened beyond simple maintenance. So they took an extremely inappropriate route here, where they tried to divert attention away from the truth of the matter. So that was the first strike for U of T. Already they're off to a bad start the morning after. And before we get more into what else they did, I just want to make a point to everyone here that school is very important, but the curriculum should never make you feel like killing yourself. We're here to learn, not to die. So the second strike the U of T encountered was their lack of acknowledgement as towards what really happened here. And on top of that, it seemed like they weren't too adamant about putting in place infrastructure to make sure the event didn't have a repeat. This set off a lot of student groups and people were protesting. You may have seen some Instagram posts on your feed actually. There is a viral, I believe it was a post really denouncing U of T for their actions and calling for something to be done about the situation because it is getting very grave. People are referring to U of T as U of Tears now because of just how grueling the work is, and on top of that they have a very competitive nature towards the school. People are not really trying to help each other out sometimes in certain programs. The curriculum is extremely challenging, and it's just a lot of pressures that go into being a U of T student. That's not to say the other universities don't have it as well, but it seems like a U of T, it is extremely more compounded. So what does U of T have to do to correct the issue? Well, it's extremely complicated because there's a wide variety of reasons why people might feel down about the program and reasons why they may contemplate suicide. And it's hard to cater a program to fit those limitless, unique circumstances because some of them even reside outside the reach of schools, such as what if your parents have extremely high expectations of you? That's not something the school can really control per se, especially not directly. So where can we start? I believe the thing that they should look towards first is creating a more fair program that doesn't come with so much pressure. At U of T, the dropout rates are extremely high. On top of that, certain programs within U of T are highly competitive where people feel like they can't reach out and get a helping hand. And that makes people seem a little bit uncomfortable even being there in the first place, and to people who are not performing to their best ability, it makes them feel like they don't belong. So now you have someone who is struggling, feels like they don't belong, and they're not really too sure where to turn to because they're unaware of the resources in place that can help make the situation a little bit better. So let's say U of T tackles that and does create a curriculum that's a little bit more fair, a little bit less stressful for students. It's almost a certainty that some people will still feel these ways because, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of external factors that take into account how you feel about school, such as things like your parents or even you yourself and your expectations of what you want for the future. If your results aren't aligning with that necessarily, then you might start to feel disconnected. So what do you do then? You've done what you could through the curriculum. Well, now you go on to step 2, which is via the means of proper therapy and mental health initiatives. Because let's face it, there's always going to be people who stress out in relation to school, almost to the point where it's almost irrelevant how UFT decides to structure their curriculum. They can make it more fair, but as it gets fairer, people will not stress out as much, but there's still going to be people who need help. And those are the people who really need the help the most, honestly, because if they're feeling stressed out, even with a more toned down curriculum, there's something wrong at the root. And that typically signifies a mental health issue. And resources need to be put in place to ensure these people don't take drastic measures, such as what we've seen from the 2 students who did kill themselves. It feels like UFT's current approach has been the opposite of this, though. First of all, there's been very little acknowledgement as to the situation itself. They've yet to acknowledge the problem of suicide. It seems like they're even afraid to usher the word because it might tarnish their reputation or detract students from applying to the school due to this highly stressful reputation they've amassed. But that's not the way you tackle the problem. You can't just hush it and try to protect yourselves, because by doing that, you amplify the issue. Hey, there's a good jumping point, actually. So speaking of amplifying the issue, how do you tackle a problem when you don't understand the full scope of it? Guess what? This was shocking to me. We don't actually know how many suicides occur on Canadian campuses. This data is not even tracked, and that's a huge mistake. The World Health Organization is quoted saying, "Quality data is required for effective suicide prevention." Well, isn't that unfortunate, because we don't have that. Now is the perfect time to start. Better late than never, but it's still astonishing to me because it seems like there isn't even traction to try and get these things recorded, because people are still dodging the labels like suicide. They want to label it something different. It's like, no. Stick to the facts, keep things true, let's accumulate data so we can understand the problem and develop a strategy to tackle it. We do have some other information we can base some judgments off, though. So the College Assessment Survey came up with these troubling statistics. So 65% of college and university students say they suffer from overwhelming anxiety. That is massive. 6.5 students out of every 10 deal with overwhelming anxiety, not just regular anxiety. It's overwhelming to the point where they don't even want to go to school anymore. So the next stat, 46% say they are depressed to the point that it interferes with everyday life. That is also insane. These students are so depressed that they can't get it off their mind. It begins to interfere with their daily life functions. And even worse, 15% self-injure by cutting or burning themselves. That's highly destructive behavior. And as you can see, these people need to get help. They're trying to cope with their situation as best as they can, and that's a manifestation of that. But this is not the proper approach, obviously. Cutting and burning yourself doesn't help solve the problem. It just amplifies it, or at the very best, it pushes it off to another day. So the next thing is 14% of students say they have considered suicide, and 2.1% say they have survived a suicide attempt. How crazy is that? 14% of students want to kill themselves, and 2% of them have tried to, and they have survived. Now I wonder how many of them have tried to and died because we don't have the last piece of the puzzle there. The one thing we can conclude with absolute certainty is that there is a massive issue here that has to be tackled. And it's unfortunate that these 2 students had to be the ones to go to really alert people to the severity of the problem. But due to that, people are now talking about it. Students are getting more engaged, and they're demanding mental health services to help them cope. This is a positive thing, and I hope UFT responds to the call to action, because as a university, it is almost their responsibility. Actually, you could say it really is their responsibility. They have to create an environment that is conductive of learning. They shouldn't be creating environments where the stress is so crippling, students don't even want to go to school. Students don't want to learn. Instead, they want to kill themselves. That doesn't sound like the ideal learning environment to me. So, keeping with the topic of mental health is our next story, and it involves solitary confinement. Basically, Ontario is reassessing how appropriate a measure it really is. And what happened with this was the Ontario court recently ordered a correctional facility to pay tens of millions of dollars for placing thousands of mentally ill prisoners in solitary confinement. Just to give you an idea of what solitary confinement is kind of like, it basically isolates inmates in cells the size of a parking space for 22 or more hours a day. They get a couple hours of leisure time, but for the rest of that, they're trapped in this small block and they're left to their own devices, really, just alone, nothing to do, slowly losing their mind. If you want to make crazy people, that's how you make crazy people. I'm just imagining it myself, being trapped in a room that small for 22 hours a day, and that's only for one day. Imagine being sentenced to solitary for multiple days, even weeks or months. I would come out pretty crazy because as humans, we kind of need that social interaction. I would just go loco for Cocoa Puffs just by myself with nothing to do. Here is a list of some of the ailments solitary confinement has been known to cause: hallucinations, paranoia, self-harm, suicidal thoughts. If you aren't getting the gist by now, it seems like it's a lot of negative things: dementia, schizophrenia, and to me, the crazy thing is self-harm. How can you self-harm yourself in a cell like that? It seems like the most effective way is to smash your head against the wall or something, and I imagine, depending on how long you've been in there for, it starts looking like a very attractive option. So the main argument surrounding the whole controversial solitary confinement thing is whether or not this falls under cruel and unusual punishment, which is prohibited by our charter. People are arguing for and against it. So one thing to keep in mind is solitary has two uses. The first one is actually to protect people. Let's say you're in jail because you ratted on someone, or you're in trouble with a rival gang and the wardens need to protect you. The best way to do that is to separate you entirely from the rest of the prison populace and keep you in solitary. The question then arises of how long will you be in there for, because being in a prison, it's highly unlikely the threat will ever be totally neutralized. So those people who are in there for protection might be in there for a while. And there's the second group of people who enter solitary, and these are the hardcore troublemakers who aren't allowed to mingle with other prisoners because every time they do, it ends up resulting in a riot or a fight, or they're creating crime for themselves in prison, extending their sentences, stuff like that. And it's overall detrimental for the rest of the inmates to be around this individual. And that's pretty crazy, honestly. That basically means you are the king of jail. You are the baddest MFer in that place. No one else can stand to be around you because you're causing that much havoc. They have to lock you away and throw away the key, basically. To me, the issue breaks down to a core component of what is jail really supposed to do. And according to a lot of Canadians, it's meant to rehabilitate people. And eventually the end goal is to reintegrate them into society as fully functional members who have repented for their past actions and they're ready to turn a new leaf. Based on that definition, solitary confinement seems awfully contradictory. Do you want more crazy people to be released onto the streets? Do you want to take a seemingly normal person, lock him away with his deepest, darkest thoughts for days on end with nothing to do, and then try to reintegrate that person back into society? It seems to me that we're taking people who may already be crazy, making them crazier, and then eventually when their sentence is done, they'll be free to mingle among the general populace with their new crazy thoughts. So overall, it seems highly detrimental, and honestly, I would consider it to be cruel punishment, especially if they're doing it not to protect the individual, but as a means of punishment. It's almost crazy to imagine being in that situation. It's hard to imagine how you would react, and because of that barrier, it's hard to put yourself in these prisoners' shoes. But think about it. Being isolated for a minimum of 22 hours a day in a small space, not even enough room to get up and walk. Like, imagine yourself being on an airplane for 20 hours. That already is unbearable. Now imagine doing that for a week straight or a month straight with nothing to do, and it just gets overwhelming at some point. And I really wonder if they're doing more damage than good with this sort of repentance method. So those are my thoughts on that. Now we're going to move on to a really interesting situation, and one that I find highly comical, honestly, and that is Brexit. Yes, it seems like every day it's in the news for something new, and it's always bad. For those of you who are unaware, the entire Brexit situation really started when Britain passed a referendum throughout their country. People voted on whether or not they wanted to leave the EU, and based on the results, they thought it was a good idea to try and get the motion going. So it's been a long time since that happened, and what's taken place? Well, the first Brexit bill failed in the House, and then recently, the second bill failed in the House. Now PMA is trying to get her third bill to go through, and at this point, people are extremely fed up with her. people from her own party are calling for her to step down because of the way she's handled the entire situation. And on top of that, the referendum happened and it indicated some type of interest in people wanting to leave the EU. Now, residents are fed up. They think it's a terrible idea. I mentioned previously the story about a petition being signed by people that got about 2 million signatures in the first day. Well, it started growing exponentially since then. I believe it's at over 5 million now. You can take that as a telltale sign that people are starting to get fed up with the entire situation and the incompetence of politicians to get anything happening within the current system. So, what does PM May do to try and get her third bill to pass? She does what I call the kamikaze strategy, where you sacrifice yourself to meet your objective. So, what does that mean? She announced that she will step down if her bill passes in Parliament. Pass my idea and you won't have to deal with me anymore. Seems like a pretty fair bargain, right? People are fed up with May. They want her out the house. Well, people are starting to think differently towards her proposition. Maybe we can fail your bid and get you to resign at the same time. And it seems like that's the most popular sentiment that's growing in Britain right now. Funny enough, there's a heavy aspect of irony to this whole situation. She wanted to rally support for leaving the EU. She wanted to unite the British people in a front to remove themselves. But it seems like she's effectively done the opposite. She has united all politicians, even those within her own party, are now united with the opposition in an effort to get rid of her. Everyone has their pitchforks out. So why is she doing this? I think it's because she wants to redeem some type of strand of her legacy. A lot of people hate her. A lot of people don't want to see her as the PM anymore. She probably sees the writing on the wall. Her time as the leader of this nation is pretty much over. And she doesn't want to leave on the worst note possible, getting kicked out with nothing to her name, no valid success with this whole EU proposition. So to her, maybe if her bill passes, she can leave that type of legacy that she was the one to get this going. And in order to get that, she's willing to step down because her career is pretty much over at this point. People want to get rid of her, so maybe she can kill two birds with one stone. Try and get some redemption and then give the people what they want. As I said, I think it's not going to happen because what she doesn't realize is people can get their cake and eat it too. They don't have to take this bid if they think it's bad. And on top of that, there's already growing resentment to get rid of you anyways. If they just wait it out, she'll be done regardless. So overall, this whole thing has been a massive disaster. The politics over there are in shambles. I expect her latest bill to also fail, and that'll just be symbolic of the way people feel about Brexit at this point in time. I'll keep you up to date with the latest on the situation, and we'll find out if her kamikaze approach has any success or if it fails like I fully expected to do. So let's end the episode with a casual conversation, and today I want to talk about something I'm really looking forward to, and it's almost here. I can almost taste it, and that is the premiere of the last season of Game of Thrones. This is honestly probably the single best TV show I've ever seen in my life, and I would even go as far to say it's the best piece of TV ever created in all of human history. It's that good. If you haven't seen it, you need to get on it. For those of you who are already, I was going to discuss actually what I think is going to happen, but now that I think about it, that's probably super spoiler to a lot of people. But all I'm going to say is Game of Thrones has a history of surprising people. So if you think it's going to play out where the Dragon Rider and her boyfie fall in love and become the king and queen, I think it's kind of unlikely. I think we're going to see one of them die. I haven't used their names to protect their identity in case someone hasn't watched the series, but I think one of them is going to die, either the guy or the girl. And who's going to be on the Iron Throne? I don't think it's going to exist personally. I think it's going to become a democracy, and that would just be funny. A perfect ending to it. People are fighting for the throne, and no one gets it. That'd be pretty interesting. So, well, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for joining me on the Perri platform. I'll see you soon.